Hi, everyone. Welcome to the OCP Virtual Summit and to our panel today on network operating systems, disaggregation, and OCP networking. My name is Omar, and together with Shin today, we'll be moderating this panel. And we have four panelists today from different companies that work on network operating systems. What we'll do is we'll go through first and have them each introduce themselves, starting with Pete.
Hi, I'm Pete Lumbus. I run technical marketing here at Cumulus Networks. We make a network operating system that runs on white box and bright box switches from a bunch of different manufacturers over 100 different platforms, including a number of OCP certified and OCP inspired platforms. We've been involved in OCP basically since the very beginning. We continue to have a pretty strong dedication to OCP.
Great. Thanks, Pete. Moving on to Ricardo.
Thanks, Omar. I'm Ricardo Pianta. I'm responsible for the engineering manager at Datacom. Datacom designs and manufactures its own data communications equipment since 1999. The company started with a PDA-SDH product for transport networks, a pre-legacy series of products. And 12 years ago, we introduced our first Ethernet switch in the market. Nowadays, we are in the second generation of those switches, and we have a complete portfolio, including access, aggregation, and transport, mostly for campus and metro Ethernet segments. We have probably the most important R&D group in Latin America, and with a very strong vertical expertise. We have knowledge from the basic hardware, FPGA design, low-level BSP, Broadcom's SDK, kernel, network protocols. So it's a pretty broad set of knowledge that gives us some advantage in terms of playing in a lot of different areas. We have been working at Disaggregated and NOS for quite a while, and including activities in other segments like virtual OLTs and also telecom infra project.
Great. Thank you, Ricardo. And Philippe?
Hi, I'm Philippe Michelet. I'm leading the product management activities at Calum. So what is Calum doing? Calum initially designed a software-defined fabric, has the ability to control in a fully open way an entire set of leaf and spine switches. For the last year or so, the focus is now to develop very specifically a set of 5G services, starting with user plane function, leveraging OCP design switches, and in particular the Wedge 100 based on the Barefoot Tofino ASIC, with again multi-terabit of throughput with complete interoperability with multiple vendors.
Thank you. And then wrapping up with Joe.
Hi, Omar. Thank you. I'm Joe Whitehouse. I'm VP of Sales and Business Development for the networking software part of Metaswitch. So at Metaswitch, we consider ourselves the experts in networking software. And I say experts because we're actually entering into our 5th decade of providing networking software for both hardware and software system vendors. And so over those 40 plus years, we've seen a lot of advancements, whether it be software-defined networking, the rise of IP traffic, and now open networking. And throughout those times, we've really enabled our customers in 3 ways. The first is business transformation. So that could be things like helping hardware-centric vendors become more software-centric, having our customers go from a more proprietary solution to an open solution. Second feature that we provide is really adding new revenue streams and go-to-markets. So we're typically working with enterprise customers who want to serve the telco market, or the telco customers trying to migrate towards the enterprise market. And then lastly is just accelerating time to market or feature velocity. And again, we've been doing this for a long time. Customers include Cisco, Alcatel-Lucent, Huawei, Adva, Ciena, Datacom, and even smaller players like Versa and Silver Peak. So glad to be here today. Thank you.
Thank you. So we'll move on to the first question. You've just heard from the panelists quite a varied set of backgrounds, a lot of time within networking. So We'll start off with the first question here, and we'll start with Pete. We'd love to know how your company has participated in, benefited from the OCP networking ecosystem of hardware, open hardware and software.
I think for Cumulus, it's been very unique. I mean, we started with ONI, right? That was a Cumulus creation that was provided to OCP, in the very beginning. And our whole business model, the whole kind of way we run our company and how we interact with customers and how we think about the networking ecosystem is exactly in line with OCP. It's that open first standards, collaborative approach. For us, we rely on Linux for everything we do, which, although it's not OCP, it's kind of that same philosophy and mentality. So again, whether it's us writing and open sourcing ONI, providing that to OCP, whether that's the work we've done on things like Facebook Voyager for optical, or anything in between, it's really been core to everything at Cumulus since day one.
Fantastic. Thanks. And Ricardo?
Datacom has a dual perspective as we provide both hardware and software. As a hardware manufacturer, we see the community as a source of designs that are not in our immediate roadmap. So with these additional platforms, we have the possibility of augmenting our portfolio, fulfilling different customer needs, penetrate segments that we are not used to. So this is a pretty interesting possibility of enhancing the capacity in terms of product generation. Another side effect of that is that we can use some of this design as development platforms. So we are able to exercise our NOS way before we even decide to design a new hardware platform. So the consequence of that is that our software is not necessarily the critical path for a new product, since we have this ability to play with different platforms. From another perspective, as a NOS provider, it's a pretty fantastic opportunity. It's different because we are originally a kind of black box company. So we can, in this new environment, we are able to collaborate, to expand our business, to see ourselves as a software company, which is a quite different experience. But on the other hand, the ecosystem, it's a quite demanding group. So there's a broad of different products, different markets, different segments, different initiatives that goes even from the virtual OLTs on the broadband market to access, transport, data centers. So it's a quite overwhelming opportunity as well. And it's quite challenging, but very exciting by itself.
Thanks, Ricardo. It's interesting to hear, just both you and Pete talk about, you just covered how Datacom started as more of a black box company, but has been going through this transformation. But then Pete also talked about starting just from the get-go as being part of the open system. And I think it's interesting how both your companies with different histories are still able to come together within the OCP ecosystem. So thank you. Philippe?
Yeah, since Calum was founded, the assumption was always that we would productize our applications being as open whenever possible, hardware or software. In our case, there is an additional very specific attribute, which is that we use programmability, and in particular P4 from an end-to-end. Now, we really strongly benefited from the fact that OCP standardized the ONI interface, as that our ODM of choices, call it Acton, Edgecore, Inventec, etc., continue to leverage the same interface as new switches with different form factors and specification come to market. So it's very important not only for us, but in majority for our customers to know that this will remain a key tenet of our product portfolio, leaving us as Calum to bring differentiation where it really matters in the applications. And in our case, as I mentioned before, what is known as the 5G user plan function. Again, it's all about accelerating time to market and focusing us on what really matters, the application, the higher layers, leaving again the OCP only as the standard interface for the hardware, and for as many ODMs to come and contribute to hardware development for the best and the highly competitive environment.
Thanks, Philippe. That's interesting too. Just listening to both you and Ricardo, how you're both finding ways to accelerate into particular market segments based upon some of the openness of platforms that have come in through OCP. So allowing you to differentiate. So that's really that's actually makes me feel really excited about OCP networking, how far it's come in terms of really allowing companies to share, but then also move faster, hopefully, into their different market segments. So, Joe, do you want to take this question now too?
Yeah, sure. So, kind of following the lead of the previous presenters here, we've been involved in OCP for several years now, primarily around the switch abstraction interface. And like Ricardo said, prior to that OCP, we were more of a black box software provider, albeit. And with the SI interface, we've been able to be much more of an open provider of open interfaces. So now all the software enhancements that we do are pre-ported to the SI interface, which enables our customers all the benefits of open networking, given that it's all built on an open interface. So it's really been revolutionary for us.
Great. Another interesting take in terms of, obviously, like you said, many years, if not decades of experience. And as you've seen the transformation into open hardware and open software, that your company can take advantage of that. I also love how, with all the different companies here, including, the four of you all, but then also Microsoft and Facebook, we've all wind up helping each other in different ways, right? So you're referring to Sai with Microsoft, Philippe, Pete talked about some of the hardware platforms that Facebook developed that you can kind of learn from or base your offerings on. So again, it highlights, I think, more than I think I could have expected the effect of the ecosystem. So thank you all for that. So now looking forward, the next question, there's got to be challenges for your companies, right? It's not all just hey, it's all clean and all easy, and so we've got all these open platforms and open software. So we'd love to hear from you what your challenges are, the biggest challenge that one of your company faces, and how can OCP and the OCP ecosystem help? So we'll go in reverse order. Maybe Joe will go with you right again.
Sure. Thanks, Omar. Yeah, and I don't see this as much as a challenge as more as an opportunity for Metaswitch. But if you look at Metaswitch, our software is primarily used for system vendors who are building to more carrier and service provider type networks as opposed to data center networks. And what we'd like to see, or we think, we feel one of the biggest opportunities in open networking is that into service provider networks. If you look at OCP, it's largely dominated by data center players and vendors. And what we'd like to see is, how do we get more involved, the OCP more involved in service provider type networks? And I think, the work that OCP has done with the collaboration with other committees like TIP and ONF are a great step. And it's a question in our mind is like, okay, how can we help build on those collaborations? Because those committees are much more service provider focused. I think that will help even take on more traction at least for Metaswitch, but also OCP. So that's a big opportunity we see, and we're interested in working with OCP to, like I said, further build on that.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. And I think, I think we've talked about that at a couple of summits now over the last couple of years, where there's OCP networking, but there's also OCP telco. But you're right, we don't do it all together. We don't. We realize that OCP itself is part of an even larger ecosystem, and yeah, I would love to hear from going forward from yourself, but also from other folks. How can we engage that important telco service provider market? So thank you.
Great.
Philippe?
Yeah, Omar, I think that as you heard before, I mean, at Calum, we made a bet not only on openness, as we leverage OCP and ONI in particular, but P4, because we strongly believe that this is really the next major evolution, not only for the networking industry, but across the entire data center. And by the way, I'm not here to promote a single vendor. I think we start to see more and more vendors that are starting to embrace this technology. And we expect obviously that more and more will come and embrace the benefits of such technology. So what we would love to see from the OCP is to see the OCP going higher in the layers in terms of essentially providing this openness. Because for us, it's again all about accelerating applications at the higher layer, with the expectation again that again the hardware and some of the very low drivers are basically again standardized with the community providing the key components. So again, for us, it's really about again protect the investments and again leaving the customers focus on what matters, not just the operating system, but the application being executed in the hardware, let it be an ASIC, an FPGA, or a processor for that matter. Again, developing once, port across multiple platforms, independently of the target with multiple choices of performance, throughput, and cost. Again, once you have developed the application in one platform, it should be able to run on any hardware from an end-to-end perspective. So that's where we, again, would really like to see the OCP starting to collaborate further into this area.
Great, thanks for that perspective. You know, I think, and Shin and I have talked about this a number of times also in terms of how do you, you know, a lot of the software work within OCP started at the lowest layers, you know, with Cumulus and ONI, so you just get the image on the machine, and then over the years we've been evolving and saying, okay, how do we do more and more higher up? So I do agree. It's not a challenge just for your company. It's a good one to tackle for your company, but I think it's a good one to tackle for the whole group. So thank you. And Ricardo?
My answer is along the same lines. We believe that the software is right now the face in front of the customer. So the expectation in the industry is that you have to achieve in that platform the same level of quality and reliability of a black box. So it means that it will take a lot of energy to really put your logo there and ensure that it will work. We have some experience, for example, to take a white box, put our NOS there, and find issues on the platform that the vendor was not aware of, just because we exercise it more than usually in that platform. So when we see a hardware platform, we tend to think that it's just components, it's just an electrical piece, but on the top of that, there's a lot of basic hardware running there, drivers, device management infrastructure, and what we see, and it creates some difficulties for us, is the lack of standards in this low-end infrastructure. Even in the same vendor, we see different ways of implementing drivers, implementing interfaces, and it makes each of the implementations, each of the platforms that we support as a one-off effort. So my request would be to have a minimum set of standards in these drivers, in this inner infrastructure of those boxes, so it makes our introduction of new functionalities easier, because we can make just once and not one for each new platform. So that's mostly our difficulty in terms of the R&D effort that we have to engage for each new platform. We would love to support all the platforms in the market, but it takes quite a lot of energy.
I see. That's a great. It's great problem space to highlight. Again, I think that's one that we've discussed before. I think actually you bring up a couple of things. If one is that quality and reliability where I've heard actually in the past from you all and other NOS vendors where yeah, you're exercising and going through a rigorous test suites and use cases, and then you're finding how maybe the hardware didn't anticipate that, or the layers underneath weren't prepared for that. So I think that's a good one to focus on. And then the making platform onboarding easier and faster is a good challenge. So I'll be curious, when we transition to the live Q&A, which of these resonate with some of the audience. So. All right, Pete, you want to take us home here?
Yeah, I won't harp too much on it since it's come up already a couple of times. But we at Cumulus spend a lot of time on the platform porting stuff. For being a software company, I spend way too much time thinking about that low level of the hardware. And there's been some attempts in the past, something like APD, to try and address that, but it really just hasn't gotten the traction for one reason or another. But that would be one thing that'd be great to see. But I think even outside of that low-level hardware component, I think another place is in the software. SAI and Sonic are getting a lot of traction and making a lot of progress. But even that's, reinventing some of the wheels that already exist in Linux. Whether it's net new or co-developing for some of those features and components. And so I think that's one place where how do you take something like SAI and Sonic or those software layers and make them more widely applicable, put the commonality where there's commonality in, unify some of those components.
Good. I think that's a unique perspective too, in terms of how close is the development that we're doing, that you all are doing within the Linux and kernel communities, and how does that relate to some of the efforts that are going on within OCP? Another good topic. So, so with that, I think thank you all for going through those couple rounds of questions. We're going to now switch over to the open Q&A session. So what will happen at this point is that Shin and I will be going through the different questions that you all, the audience, submit to us through the chat software, and we'll then take those questions and then present those to the panelists. Again, thank you all very much for listening. Thank you to the panelists for presenting your perspectives and participating in the panel. And we're now opening up to Q&A. Thank you. Hello? All right. Hi, everyone.
Hello.
So thanks, everyone, for tuning in to the panel. We've actually got Pete, Ricardo, Philippe, and Joe on the line as well with me and Shin. And so a lot of great topics brought up during the session that we heard from the panelists. So we're open. If there are any questions, please get them into the little chat window or submit them via the Q&A tab. Just wanted to recap, a few of those potential follow-ups that came. Joe went over, can we do more, beyond data center and focusing with OCP telco. Philippe brought up going up higher in the layers. Ricardo, quality, reliability, as well as the minimum set of drivers, how do we support the platforms. So, and then making, unifying higher software layers with Pete. So let's see if we got a question here. How can Calum or any or other P4 programmable switches ensure that a software application that's inserted P4 doesn't disturb other software applications? So that question, is to you, Philippe, if you want to take that one.
Yeah, the reason why we chose essentially to use P4 is really because of the the protocol stack that is required to essentially tackle this market in particular. So if you look at the reference architecture for the 5G and the UPF in particular, there is a lot of GTP. And as we look at the future, we see as well some interest for SRv6, for which we are doing some interoperability in the next couple of months. And if you look again at the status of the market for the over ASICs, there was not really a lot of choices available for us. So again, for us, it's not just it's something very important. It's really the foundation of our differentiation and the reason fundamentally why we went into the combination of Barefoot and P4. It's really practically today the only choice available in the market to deliver, again, a high-performance multi-terabit 5G UPF with, again, the flexibility to offer as the evolution. Again, we are not just looking at 5G this year, but we look at the 3GPP standard evolution, and we look, again, at leveraging, again, a standard like SRv6 to essentially service chain not only UPF alone, but with other services like security in particular, to really offer, again, a full degree of differentiation for our customers. So again, to answer the question in a nutshell, it's really for us the telco, the edge in particular with 5G and the functionality as UPF, with, again, the protocol stack that definitely requires this degree of programmability and evolutivity, flexibility for the future.
Okay. Great. Actually, I'm going to take that question and maybe, thanks, Philippe. I was sort of thinking of taking that question and maybe looking a little bit, seeing how that applies to the other panelists, right? So there's one question to the panelists. Do your NOSes support sort of operators to add their own applications on top of your NOS? And if so, how do you make sure that the interaction between that operator added software doesn't, how do you mediate the interactions between that software that an operator adds versus the software that you've written? Anyone want to take that if you support that? Pete or Ricardo or Joe?
Yeah, this is Pete from Cumulus. For us, the big thing is we are just a Linux operating system. So we basically treat the switch like a server. So anything that you can apt install onto Debian, you apt install onto Cumulus. And then we just leave it up to that operator to more or less do the right thing and trust them. So you use traditional Linux process control things like UDEV rules to be able to manage that. But, if you install a Bitcoin miner and it goes haywire, that's on you. But we have customers that are doing things like running containers or VMs and have just set process priorities and things like that to make sure that it runs successfully on the system.
Great. Thanks.
In our case, we are able to run VMs inside as a container, so any application have access to the same not-balls interface as it was outside the box. So it gives some freedom to exercise specific controllers or specific workflows inside the box.
Okay, we've got a few other questions here. Let's see. So one question here coming in. What do you think are the most promising accelerators in switching hardware? It's potentially a broad question in terms of all the accelerators that we can be tapping into, but I'll just put it out there. Anyone on the panel want to take that? Promising accelerators that you see in switching hardware?
So I'm going to take this one, Omar, to start a conversation. So Again, as we look at again the evolution of some of the ASICs, in particular Tofino, we can see again some value in accelerating some of the protocol stack from the 5G. The thing I would add as well is that our solution, because the value of P4 is ultimately via the compiler, may be reusable for other platform and over targets. In fact, as part of our solution, we plan as well to add, in complement to the Tofino, FPGAs as well. So again, depending on the feature, you can imagine again the low touch, high performance being executed into the Tofino, and then for more complex functions, including crypto or security like DPI, we may use again the FPGA in complement to the ASIC. And then for even something even more high touch, we may use a Xeon in complement. So again, for us, that's essentially the value is we compile using the same compiler with the different targets. And again, the solution places the processing using the right target based on the feature, based on what's available at a given time. And that's, for us, again, a very important element as well of our strategy to really offer this true end-to-end with, again, the low touch sitting at the very low end, multi-terabit, to FPGAs to increase the scalability or increase the security, and then the Xeon to execute something which is obviously lower speed, but which really complements with a high-touch type processing.
Got it. Does it make sense? Kind of have the different, trying to have a consistent interface, but also have the different, the ASIC and the FPGA or the general compute all kind of being leveraged. Thanks, Philippe. Anyone else on the panel want to talk about accelerators? Whoops, wait a minute, let me see.
Omar, if you don't mind, this is Joe. Omar, this is Joe Whitehouse. If you don't mind, I wanted to jump in on the previous question, if you will. I had an audio issue.
Oh, sure, of course.
Answer that.
Yeah, no, I saw that you dropped off, and so I was like,
yeah.
Okay, good.
I apologize.
Yeah.
So the question was around sort of, portable applications on top of NOSes, and just wanted to put our 2 cents in there that at Metaswitch we see that quite a bit with our NOS deployments. So, how we address that is making sure we've got very clean APIs and the ability for people to plug and play the different types of applications and technologies they want to do. So, for example, we've got customers that have their own route table managers, but they're using our routing stack. So as long as you've got very clean code that's got clean APIs that are well advertised with you and the customer, it's never been an issue for us.
Great. I think it's a good question that came from the audience there, I think, or from the attendees in terms of how do we handle that and what sort of safeguards are there, and but I think different approaches are different, right? In terms of if you're more used to, if you're on Linux and you're doing whatever on Linux, you're used to sort of like making sure, hey, you don't, Linux provides all the low-level tools to do all sorts of things. So you have to manage that a little bit more, or you can put a little bit more safeguards in terms of whether it's strict APIs or all. So we had another question come in. If no one else wants to go over the accelerator question, what market verticals are you seeing the most interest in OpenSwitch operating systems? Maybe we can start. Pete, do you want to start us off there? I'll send it to you, then we'll go to some other folks.
Certainly. So we see in the data center, of course, and that's kind of broadly across vertical industries, basically anybody who's still building data centers and has some reason to have their own infrastructure, whether that's a strategic reason, whether that's a just a cost perspective because maybe they're using a lot of compute, a lot of storage, and a lot of bandwidth.
The places where we're actually starting to see some emergence is in the access and 1 gig space, where you're starting to see customers who are doing things like running retail stores, or places where you need a lot of wireless access. And so the network infrastructure the physical network infrastructure is very uniform, very easy to automate, very easy to manage at scale. But a lot of times they're not looking at, an extremely hostile physical access environment where they need a bunch of features for those, for security reasons there. And they're relying on, say, access points for that. So warehousing, logistics, and retail are some areas that we're actually starting to see a lot of interest in the open networking space.
Great. Anyone else want to take on, what verticals are you seeing? Ricardo, any thoughts on this?
Oops. I think I'm back.
Okay.
We're seeing some growing interest from service providers and telcos. Once you start having from some of the people here in the panel, features that are related to transport networks and more complex IP environments. So we believe that there will be this trend happening, leaving the data center as the initial target to other transport and more complex applications outside the data center, or even interconnecting data centers.
Mm-hmm. So data center or interconnecting data centers, as well as the telco environment. It sounds like that in the telco environment, that probably lines up with some of what you were saying, Joe, as well.
Yeah, I mean, the question was open switch, correct? As in the OPX operating system? Is that what the question's around?
I didn't see it specifically talk about that. I thought I interpreted it as just what market verticals are seeing the most interest in open switching, like an open switch operating system.
Okay.
I didn't.
Okay. I
unless somebody was
okay, yeah.
specifically asking about a project.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think as far as pure open switch type of environments, agreed. I actually think we're seeing it more in the enterprise and obviously data center space. And like I said in the beginning, I mean, we'd like to see more traction in telcos, and telcos have made a lot of announcements along those ways. But a lot of times it's still more on the proprietary side, even though they're advertising it as open. And we'd certainly like to see more of that, more complete openness deployed in the service provider and telco space. So short answer, it's certainly more dominant in the data center and enterprise space.
Okay, good. Well, okay, this market vertical question has prompted a whole other set of questions here, which is great to see. One question: what about the campuses in terms of engagement there? Are we seeing more campus? I think, Pete, you touched on this a little bit in terms of the access and 1 gig, but I'm not sure if we want to distinguish that with campus switching. Anyone comment on campus engagements around open switching?
This is Pete, and I'll expand on that a little bit. We are definitely seeing more in the campus. Again, it comes down to what are the needs at that access level. So if you think about like a university campus, where those physical access ports in a dorm or in a university are almost always extremely hostile. People are plugging in rogue DHCP servers and access points, and just trying to get away with whatever they can on those interfaces. Generally, that feature set of needs is higher than what's generally available out there in the open networking space today. If you look at a more controlled, say, enterprise campus, where you're connecting phones, you have trust, maybe it's a VDI environment, those are great. There's growing 802.1x support out there in some of the open networking software, including Cumulus, that's allowing for even those lower trust environments to be used where you can rely on 802.1x to authenticate that user as they connect. So there's definitely growing interest there as well. I don't want to say it's nascent, it's a little bit beyond that, but we're not quite at widespread deployment yet. But I see growing interest.
Okay, great. Anyone else on the campus want to take the campus question?
Yeah. In fact, we see the campus application more like a metro Ethernet application. And then some of the features that we offer started to make sense. More advanced in routing, segmentation. So some of these things started making sense in this environment. It's still at the beginning, but as far as we start offering some of these advanced features, I believe there will be some expansion going on there.
Okay, good. Before moving on, anyone else want to chime in on campus? Let's move on then. So here's an interesting question in terms of we talk a lot about the disaggregated hardware and software. So in these verticals, such as say within the campus or the access or the metro or in general telco environments, who handles the integration of the disaggregated hardware and software, and who maintains the combined system? Right. So if people are buying white box, bright box switches from other companies, and they're bringing your NOSes in, who integrates them and maintains them?
Yeah, let me jump here, Omar. So on our side, for example, as we interact mostly with telcos.
Can I just also remind everyone, can you just make sure people joining in, just say, Philippe, who you are.
Oh, yeah. For the reminder, hi, this is Philippe from Calum. So to answer the question, what I would say, knowing that we at Calum are mostly interacting with service providers and telcos and some CSPs, is that typically those work already with some SIs, system integrators, and we are working with these SIs. Some are already doing this job of integrating hardware and software, or in some cases when they don't, we are going to help them to basically do this integration because they see, number one, that in some cases they have no choice, meaning that their preferred customer is asking them to do that, or we basically add essentially partners into the mix to basically address one aspect. So for example, recently we are working with a big CSP, and the CSP does some integration, but works with some partners for one specific aspect, fulfillment, or in some other areas for the management and orchestration. So they have a partner that will do essentially this specific integration of our code on the top of the disaggregated hardware to make sure, again, that the whole orchestration and the life cycle of the entire solution can be done successfully.
Makes sense. Yeah, so I think ISPs or CSPs are often used to working with partners, integrators to do that sort of integration and maintenance. Other folks?
Omar, this is Ricardo here. Well, we believe that there is a consensus that the face in front of the customer will be always the software. So even no matter who is the integrator, the problems will happen on configuration, on compatibility issues. So most of them are around the software capabilities, software interfaces. So that's how we think it's going to happen. and it's happening right now.
Mm-hmm.
Omar, this is Joe Whitehouse from Metaswitch. I mean, this might be an overgeneralization, but from our view, what we've seen is as you move from the core networks, the service provider networks, all the way to the campus enterprise side, it seems that the bigger the network, i.e. the service providers, are more than capable of buying their own hardware from the white box vendors and buying their own software from the software vendors and putting it together. But as you get out towards the edge of the network to the smaller campus and enterprise environments, they're typically looking more for SI, fully packaged, even though they're disaggregated solutions, but they're fully packaged either by the software vendor, as Ricardo said, or potentially the hardware vendor.
Mm-hmm. Okay. That is true. It is, the question says in the verticals you mentioned, but it is different potentially for different verticals. Their willingness to do their own versus rely on outside folks to do the systems integration. Cool. I think anyone else wanted to chime in on who does the integration and maintenance of the combined reaggregated systems?
This is Pete from Cumulus. The way I see it is there's two different marketplaces, and I think there's absolutely space for commercial offerings there. I mean, this is exactly what Cumulus does, where we are ensuring the hardware software interface. We are porting our software to those white box and bright box systems, and ensuring that we're spinning fans and flashing lights and all those components. I think the other side is just kind of the traditional do-it-yourself model. If you're taking something that's fully open in the ecosystem like Sonic and trying to do that, I guess the question comes is how do we make that accessible to a broader industry? If I do really want to do it myself, what are my options there? And I mentioned in the beginning panel discussion in the video, there's been some attempts at that hardware platform layer with something like APD, which I can't remember. I think it was Application Platform Descriptor or something like that, was an attempt to do that, but it's still a space where the hardware vendors themselves have to be more willing to open up, have to be more willing to work in an open space, and have to be more willing to provide the information required so that folks can do it themselves and really start to accelerate that hardware-software interface.
Right. Good. So I think just looking at, I'm trying to look at, thanks, Pete. Looking at the other questions here, just also being sensitive of time, I think we'll take this as our last question. I know we have scheduled to go until, let me just make sure. We'll see how it goes, but look at this one. So one question has come in about, in terms of the adoption of the disaggregated solutions, what do you feel are the key challenges to really see large-scale adoption of your solutions in the respective verticals? And maybe we can take this across everyone, right? To say, I know for some of you are focused on one vertical, your companies are, some are maybe attacking multiple verticals. What do you feel are whichever verticals you want to cover, what do you feel are the key challenges for really wide-scale adoption of your solutions? I'll just open it up whoever wants to chime in.
Sure, I'll jump in. This is, again, Joe Whitehouse from Metaswitch. Our vertical, right, if I haven't made it clear already, is more targeted towards the service provider and telco networks. And I think we're starting to see this, but what we really need is more contribution and participation from a large number of vendors in some of the test events, in some of the contributions, such that these service providers really have that warm, fuzzy feeling that when they go to disaggregated and open networking, that they can truly swap and replace as they see fit. They can do best of breed networking, if you will. And we've got a lot of players that are, I should say, a small number of players that are very active in it. But the more consensus we have, the more participation we have, I think that's going to be the tipping point for broader adoption in these telco and service provider markets.
So just to go into that, Joe, like, is it participation from other operators? Is it participation from specific vendors that you feel is missing, or like, what do we need?
I'd like to see more vendors. But yeah, good question. I was thinking more vendors. I think would be, like I said, would give those operators a better sense of feeling that they're, it's truly closer to mass adoption now.
Mm-hmm. And are those, let me just look, in terms of the, are those vendors already participating with the OCP? Are they just not jumped in yet, or we need to bring them into OCP? Like, how do you, we need to have more events, like you said, test events and interoperability events. Like what?
Yeah, because I sense a hesitation of service provider kind of deployments, right? It's tough to measure what the actual market is when we don't see a lot of deployments yet, and so that's one of the theories we have that's kind of slowing up is we need more participation from more vendors, such that the service providers really get a feel that everyone's in this now, and everyone's going to be going, for example, to the SI interface or Sonic or whatever the interface is, such that those service providers and telco markets can truly benefit from the HUD swappable capabilities of open and disaggregated network.
Okay, and I think to your point from earlier about that vertical, participating with the larger community, ONF and TIP, to just name a couple that you had earlier, are important for us to really they're not all going to be, they're already participating in a number of other organizations, and so OCP, I think, and we have been doing this, is announcing partnerships and trying to find these joint events. So cool, thanks, Joe.
Yeah.
Other folks.
This is Ricardo here.
What's your challenge for adoption?
Omar?
Yes. Philippe?
Just to complement the previous one, I think the Telecom Infra project has an interesting approach to this suggestion that Joe brought, having the TIP labs. So the TIP labs are places where the vendors get together and they work as a kind of showcase for applications. Maybe this would be a path to follow.
Oh, that's a good idea. And maybe that, I don't know if we do that on our own or just in conjunction with OCP Telco and TIP. That's that'll be interesting to see. Okay, thanks. Last couple. Any comments on this? On this, how to drive more adoption or the challenges toward adoption?
This is Pete from Cumulus. I'll chime in here again. I think there's a couple of pieces. I think one is around the marketing of that adoption. So a lot of the folks who we work with who are deploying at scale, who are widely successful, also tend to be folks who don't want to go and talk or don't have the staff or the budget to put people in conferences on stage necessarily. And, we're seeing that it's not just like, oh, this tier one cloud provider, but we're seeing this also just in enterprise. There's not a culture and a lot of enterprises of doing conferences, of doing public speaking, of trying to do that thought leadership. So I think that's a challenge there. But I also think that if we look at the industry, I think the industry itself is a challenge. We are an extremely conservative bunch. We are extremely reluctant to change. We are extremely unwilling to invest significant time and energy into changing how we do things. I mean, inertia is our biggest challenge. And if you look at even outside of open networking, Cisco's obviously the dominant player, and their number two is Arista. And I honestly believe a big part of that is just because of the identical command line. And that's been a challenge for Juniper because, we see network engineers just unwilling to start to do those new things. Even as we start to see more network automation in enterprise, there still continues to be friction or reluctance to start to adopt these things, to learn, to explore, to do more and grow. And I think as long as that inertia is there, as long as there aren't, existential threats to the organization that really kind of get people in gear, we'll continue to see challenges in this space, just as a result of the culture of network engineering.
Thanks, Pete. And I think on that point, we would certainly encourage anyone, as you all work with companies, and if for folks on the line here, whether enterprise service provider, cloud provider, if you're adopting and using this technology, our open technologies, would love to hear and have you share that. I mentioned this earlier, the Sonic keynotes and panels yesterday, I think, was a really interesting way to see, that's just one example, in addition to all of the NOSes that you all provide, where it does take a lot of time to get people to talk about it, in terms of encouraging to talk. They're far in their implementation, or even just kicking the tires. It does take some time, but I think that's something that we are at OCP are committed to providing that platform and really encouraging people to share those adoption stories, because it's that sort of, you feel good when everyone else is jumping in, and so just you have to tell everybody else is jumping in, and there is a lot of that that we're seeing. So good, thanks, Peter. Philippe?
Yeah, I mean, I will definitely agree with what Pete said regarding the fact that for the last 20, 30 years, you have essentially a dominant player, and it's very difficult for the networking bunch, as he said, to basically look at, even consider an alternative. So the big seven have done the change because they had no other choice, financially speaking, to deploy their application at scale. And now it's for the next wave to look at this with fresh eyes and to look at an opportunity versus as, staying and looking at the legacy. So again, I'm going to use my marketing hat in that case and come to look at what we do at Calum, not just, from a pure hardware and P4, but as well as the fact that we look at the operating systems slightly differently. We had adopted the concept of, containers from the get-go with essentially an implementation of Kubernetes in such a way, that we focus on the application, the CNF, if you want, versus looking at the operating system as the differentiator. The differentiator for us, is the application and how we can quickly develop this application that matter to our customers as telcos and service providers, as the CNF, and how we can combine the CNF together, leveraging the best hardware for a given CNF at a given time. And then to Pete's point we are not going to look at a CLI anymore, because we believe that if you want to deploy at scale, the CNF, the CLI is just not a potential or realistic solution. Debugging maybe, but not for production and not for life cycle when you have, thousands of those to deploy into tens of thousands of sites potentially, as we look at the market for 5G and the edge in particular.
Right. And I think, and maybe thanks, Philippe. I think to wrap up the session, I think you bring up, all of you all have brought really good points along the way here in terms of, there is a lot of innovation that's going on. If you look at, networking has come a long way in many ways, but it's also still using a lot of the concepts over the last 20, 30 years, right? So in the same conversation, we're talking about protocols or interfaces that were developed 30 years ago, but then we're talking about newer technologies, whether programmability or containerization or other things that I think many of us here are at the leading edge and forefront of. So there is progress in a lot of ways, but I think this panel we've also handled some of the constants, right? Testing and reliability. Who does integration? What's the interface that our network engineers are dealing with? So as much as we want to innovate, we have to also innovate in some of those areas like testing and integration and interfaces to bring along the whole ecosystem and community. So I think with that, I really appreciate the panel, all of you all sharing your thoughts here over this whole session. There were a lot of other questions that came in on the chat. We couldn't get to all of them, so for the audience, really appreciate you engaging here. If you want to ask questions of the panel, feel free to share those questions on the OCP mailing list as well. We've also got a number of opportunities within the virtual summit, with connecting using the networking facilities of the virtual environment that we've got here, whether it's the networking lobby or just reaching out to the panelists. So thank you all again. Thanks to the panel, and enjoy the rest of the summit. Thank you.